Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. Hope you guys having a great night. I want to continue a little bit reading on the book that we was reading last. We were talking about how did the belief of Lukankasi and Nsambi, the belief that the Kikongo people did not or do not believe in a so-called devil that was or implemented and instituted by the Catholic faith when they came into the island and started Christianizing the people. Here we go. It says, over the last 2 decades or so, Santeria has been referred to as the magical Catholicism by practitioners and anthropologists, and this does reflect both a meeting and a departure point in the general Creole spirituality. Still, the idea of Nkisi and the Nganga is a Holy Congo concept and is mirrored in Yoruba land, namely the Shigidi or Shigaidi. They not make part of the Santeria equation on traditional premises. This means that whatever approximations can be drawn between Mpungo and Orisa, they are missing out on important distinctions defined by the ancestry and lineage. It is perhaps possible to trace the syncretic factor to the term Creole when the Portuguese, and by the extension the Spaniards, arrived in the Congo. They had offsprings that were neither European nor African, and thus entered into a middle class able to draw on both heritages. This is attested to by the use of criollo as a term designated this middle ground in the Iberian perception of caste. It also clearly shows the low opinion the explorers held of the Africans, as it was believed that the European blood elevated the offsprings to a state of limbo between the African and European. We shall not enter here into the Iberian concept of cleanliness of blood, but just state that the consequence of this was an amazing opportunity of being subject to a dual heritage that potentially could enrich the individual. Excuse me. With the entrance of the spirit of modernity and its obsession of defining what is in terms of what it is not, the Creole ended up between two poles, and their potential as a bridge was replaced with syncretism. Here we find an important anxiety and social tension that few people today dare venture into, fraught as it is with prejudice and racism. The whole issue is rooted in a disintegration of traditional replaced with a profane taxonomy that wilt obsessed with category does not understand the composite. Palio Mayombe is a cult subject to a great variety of distinctions and explanation in terms of the origins and nature. This is caused partially by syncretism, both religious and social, but also the forgetting of one's roots, which often happens when a tradition adopts itself to a new land. This forgetfulness can be a good thing, but depending on the social context, it can also introduce much bias and distortion. Syncretism always speaks of the play between power and resistance in a culture. This interaction based on a nerve of the fire shows itself in the African mission. In large parts of Iwi and Bantu-speaking parts of Africa, it was crucial to elect a reference to God and another reference to take place of the devil. As such, the traditional monism of the African was subject to forces of distortion already in Africa. This naturally continued and gave birth to a binary worldview at times adopted by practitioners of African-inspired cults in the New World, by the mere presence of an adversary. In spite of this, the original monotheism speaks quietly in proverbs and tales, erasing duality in favor of a harmonious cosmology situated around an owner of heaven, earth, and creation. The houses, Munansos, and the lineages, Ramas, do possess some variations that give rise to disputes over superiority. This is most evident in language, which occurs at times when paleros meet. Language takes the form of a battle of wisdom, where proverbs, mambos, songs, fragments of myths, usually of a Kikongo derivation, are used in battle between the paleros. The inherent tension in Congo ancestry itself continues through this practice, which for an outsider can appear to be a form of public debunking of each other. It is popularly accepted that the impulses that were to generate Palo Mayombe arrived in Cuba in the 16th century, brought by Congolese slaves of royal descent. At least, this is the common myth informing the cult's origin. It is quite likely that the cults taking shape into Palo Mayombe consisted of highly secretive and selective groups regarding a Nganga. This would be even more reasonable, seeing that until the middle of the 19th century, Palo was largely bare to Caucasians, and likewise the secret society Abakwa derived from the Leopard Society in Central Africa. The entrance of Creole and white was opened by a Haitian Creole, Andres Facundo de los Dolores Petit himself, a Mason, a man of mixed blood. Through his affiliation with one of the two fundamental and traditional Abakwa societies, he created the Kimbisa order, or rather, in full, Orden Kimbisa del Santo Cristo de Buen Viaje, because he did not create the first Kimbisa order. He took from part of he was part of a Rama that is called Santo Cristo Buen Viaje by Andrés Petit. This was the beginning of Creole Palo. This means that it was André Petit who opened the doors to the Creole societies, the secrecy. Oh, I'm sorry. This was the beginning of Creole Palo. This means that it was André Petit who opened the doors to the Creole sorcery of Palo Mayombe. With the opening of the doors, a great syncretism occurred, and an equally great diversity in opinions. Given the focus Palo Mayombe has on death and sorcery, it has gained a heavy reputation for being a portal for vile and sinister magic of the blackest kind. This had led some to make distinction between paleros being bad and mayumberos being good. Here we find the imposed dualism between Nsambi and Lucancasi at play. Those who work the garden of Nsambi paleros being good, but the others being bad. The Nganguleros, holder of Nganga priests, who sees nature as a superior to man, which contains a lack of respect for the human soul, is by virtue sinister. And when this is reversed, we find a benevolent reflection of the white sorcerer who works in service for humankind. The same contrast is found in the distinction between baptized or Christian prenda, Nganga, or a Ndoki, or a Judía, a Jewish prenda, or Nganga. The latter designates a prenda that is made to work for evil, while the baptized prenda works for good. The prenda or Nganga is your foundation. The Nganga is in Cuban the name for the spirit vessel itself, while in Congo the word refers to the sorcerer. They are both right, because in reality there is no distinction between the potency of the Nganga and the holder of the vessel. A pact is made to align the Mfumbe or Mfuiri with that Tata Nganga. It is a common belief that this duality is a result of syncretism on one hand and a way of masking pagan beliefs behind Christian saints on the other hand. Following this thread of reasoning, Andrés Petit is commonly seen as an innovator of a particular fusion of Creolese and Christian theology. This is most likely not the case. I believe Andrés Petit actually made accessible a Congolese spirituality that was pretty much intact since the 17th century amongst the Luz Cabildos in Cuba, whereas some formed into Abakwa societies with the arrival of Masonry. This idea suggests itself when we apply historical scrutiny and discernment. It is obvious that many slaves in the crossings were already Christians. Of course, not all adopted the new faith, and here we perhaps find the hard distinction between good and evil along very Christian lines. The connection between Abacuá society is implied by the name Mayombe itself, a specific area in the Upper Congo where the Carabalis came from. The name refers to the Cross River region of Calabar, between Upper Congo and Lower Nigeria, that served as a slave port. From here, they were taken to the city of Hegla, which nowadays makes up one of the neighborhoods in Havana. This was the last big wave of slaves that began in 1836. From this wave grew the secret society of Abacuá, a communication of the leopard or the leopard society of Efik and Ajagam, of the Efik and Ajagam people. The society was similar to Masonry and was strict and orderly. They had much in common with Palo Mayombe, but seem to have managed to secure a more stringent corpus of law and complexity, at least if the Anoforona, the Abacuá firmas are taken into consideration. Sorry, I couldn't get that word. Anafarona. The Abacuá firmas are taken into consideration. In these designs, we find a greater array of themes and complex mysteries expressed. Likewise, in their well-organized theatrical dance dramas, they perform further complexities is found. These dances are called ñañingos or ireme, or just a commonly diablitos, devils. They dress in checkerboard costumes, which is reminiscent of the vestment of the members of the leopard cult. The specific design also brings to our attention the Yoruba's neighboring Calabar with their Ogboni society. They have an important relationship to the leopard and serve as the council of elders with some Masonic similarities. The canonical rage used to cover the head complete as a costume that actually remains use of the Egungun cults amongst the Yoruba, seeing that the Abacuá's most important day is 12th night, the 6th of January, a day of misrule and the three magi, and how they unleashed the Diablitos upon the streets to honor the presence of other world among us. There is clearly a variant ancestor cult burning at its foundation. I believe the arrival of the Abacuá in many ways sustained Congo society and was instrumental in Palo Mayombe managing to preserve its authentic flavor. This would also be suggested by the large amount of paleros who are members of Abacuá society. This most benevolent influence aside, a certain deconstruction of Bantu culture through migration and social influences did take place. This generated some divergence in doctrine and dogma from the original, and out of a neo-construction born form fragmented tradition and social pressure the cult takes form. Its rich origins are to some extent visible in the diversity of house customs and variations in terminology. It might be that the cult itself went through a similar process as the language went through. The Bantu and Iwi dialects from Congo and Angola degenerated in Cuba, leading to a variation in pronunciation and meaning that gradually dislocated the emerging Palo Mayombe cult from the metaphysical principles of its origins. Salam alaikum, alaikum salam. I'm sorry for the misspelling some of the words. Hope you guys understood. Have a great night. Peace.